All right, let's dive into one of the most fascinating debates of the 20th century. And it's not about whether God exists. Nope. It's about something way more fundamental. Whether the very sentence, God exists, actually means anything at all. So, how did this whole thing play out? Well, you can think of it like a philosophical gauntlet, a series of really tough tests that any statement about God has to get through just to be considered part of the conversation. For, centuries, this was the question, right? Philosophers, theologians, everyone was asking, is it true or is it false? It was this endless back and forth, and honestly, it felt like it was stuck. But then, in the 20th century, a new group of thinkers came along and basically hit the brakes. They said, hold on, everybody. We're all asking the wrong question. Before you can even get to whether something is true, you have to ask something else first. And here it is. Before we can ask if a statement is true, we have to know if it's even meaningful. Is it actually making a claim about reality? This idea led philosophers to make a really crucial distinction. So, this new approach kind of splits all language into two big buckets. In one bucket, you've got cognitive language. These are factual claims about the world. The table is wood. You can check it, you can prove it, true or false. In the other bucket, you have non-cognitive language. Think of it like shouting ouch when you stub your toe. You're not making a factual claim, you're just expressing a feeling. And so the whole debate now pivots to a new question. Which of these is religious language? Okay, so here comes the first test in our gauntlet. It came from a group called the logical positivists. They were super inspired by science and basically wanted to apply that same kind of strict empirical thinking to, well, everything. And this led the philosopher Ayer to come up with a really strict test he called the verification principle. The idea is pretty simple. If you can't test a statement with your senses, if you can't see it, hear it, touch it, whatever, then it's not actually a statement about reality. It might be an expression of emotion, sure, but it has zero factual cognitive meaning. So from Ayer's point of view, since God is, a metaphysical term, it refers to something beyond the physical world, any statement about God just automatically fails the test. It's not that God exists is false. It's that the sentence itself is literally meaningless. It's like saying colorless green ideas sleep furiously. It's just a jumble of words. But another philosopher, Hick, came up with a really clever counterargument. He said, okay, but what if verification is possible? We just can't do it yet. He called this eschatological verification, which basically means verification at the end of things. Hick tells this little story. Imagine two people traveling down a long road. One of them, the theist, believes it leads to a beautiful celestial city. The other, the atheist, thinks it leads absolutely nowhere. Now, while they're walking, neither one can prove they're right. But when they get to the end of the road, one of them is going to be proven correct. Hick said, this is just like how we knew there were mountains on the dark side of the moon. Before we sent a probe, we couldn't check it in practice, but we knew it was verifiable in principle. And Hick says the same thing is true for God. All right, let's keep moving. After that whole verification debate, another philosopher, Antony Flew, came along and proposed a different and, you could argue, even tougher test for what counts as a meaningful statement. Flew's whole point was this. If you make a claim, but there's no possible evidence that could ever convince you that you're wrong, then your claim isn't really saying anything about the world at all. To say this chair is blue means you're also saying it's not red or green or yellow. If your claim doesn't deny anything, it doesn't really assert anything either. And Flew used this great little parable to make his point. Two explorers stumble upon a clearing in a jungle that looks like a well-kept garden. One says, there must be a gardener who comes here, but they watch and no one ever shows up. Ah, says the believer, it must be an invisible gardener. So they set up electric fences and guard dogs, but nothing ever gets tripped. Well, says the believer, he's also intangible and silent and has no scent. And this is where Flew asks his killer question. The believer just keeps adding more and more qualifications to protect their claim from any test, until the idea of this gardener is compatible with literally anything. The claim, as Flew famously put it, dies a death of 1,000 qualifications. It gets so watered down, it doesn't mean anything anymore. So at this point, it's looking pretty bad for religious language, right? It seems to fail these scientific-style tests. But then, some philosophers took a step back and started to wonder, what if the tests themselves are the problem? What if the rules of this whole gauntlet were rigged from the start? And this is the big twist in the whole debate. What happens when you turn these super strict philosophical principles back on themselves? Do they actually hold up? Check this out, because this is kind of a brilliant takedown. The verification principle itself says, a statement is only meaningful if you can verify it with your senses. Okay, so can you verify that statement with your senses? Nope. Is it true by definition? No. So according to its own rules, the verification principle is meaningless. It completely saws off the very branch it's sitting on. And it wasn't just Ayer's principle. Critics pointed out that you could turn Flu's falsification test right back around on atheism. I mean, what evidence could ever falsify the belief that God does not exist? If God literally appeared in the sky, a committed atheist could just say it's a mass hallucination or some kind of super advanced alien technology, which suggests that maybe this test isn't the perfect, neutral tool everyone thought it was. So this brings us to the final and maybe most radical move in this whole debate. The suggestion that maybe we've been trying to play the wrong game this whole time. That the problem isn't religious language, but the fact that we're trying to judge it by one single universal set of rules.
The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein came along with this idea of language games. He argued that meaning isn't about pointing to things in the world. Meaning is all about context. Different parts of our lives, science, art, religion, just joking around with friends, they're all like different games. And every single game has its own logic and its own rules for what makes sense.
I mean, think about it. You wouldn't use the formal language you use in a job interview when you're just hanging out with your friends, right? It would be weird. So, Wittgenstein asks, why on earth would we use the rules of the science language game, which is all about empirical, testable claims, to judge the religious language game, which is all about faith and community and a certain way of living? For Wittgenstein, trying to verify or falsify a sentence like, God exists, using scientific tools, is just a massive misunderstanding. It's like criticizing a beautiful poem because it's not a chemically accurate description of a rose. You're completely missing the point of what that sentence is being used to do within its own game. So in the end, this philosophical gauntlet didn't really settle the question of God's existence. But it did something maybe more important. It totally changed the conversation. It forced everybody to think much more deeply about the very language we use to ask these huge questions, and to wonder if we can really have one single standard for what counts as meaningful. And this leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. When people talk about God, are they making a set of factual claims about the universe, something that's supposed to be tested like a scientific theory? Or are they doing something else entirely? Are they expressing their deepest attitudes, their hopes, their fears, and their fundamental way of looking at life? The answer to that, well, it might just change everything.